Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. How are you today, Rob?
Very well, thank you. And today we're continuing and finishing up our series on personality.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about the true self, the true personality. Who is the real you? Because we talked about personality tests, we talked about narcissism, we talked about difficult people. Now we're going to talk about underneath the layers of this personality that we call ourselves I. Who are we really? Yeah. So let's start with who are we? What is the true self, and what does Jung say about this?
Yeah, so we should talk a little bit about that. Our perspective is definitely based on a Jungian model. Mm-hmm. So we have that perspective. And then the Eastern wisdom traditions, which really kind of, from our point of view, they're a lot more sophisticated in understanding what is the mind, what is consciousness. We're still kind of playing catch up as far as the West goes on that in that regard. So we'll talk about that as well, and maybe a little bit of neuroscience, because neuroscience weighs in on is there a personality, is there a real self in there that we can talk about. And
so Jung saw, like a lot of people, when we first start teaching our coach training or people do our work, they are introduced to Jung. They are really surprised that they have a persona. It's something that we're so aware of ourselves, but we don't realize that what it is. So let's talk about, what is the persona? How does Jung introduce this topic into modern psychology now that we have able to understand ourselves in a different way?
Yeah, he was certainly interested in the individual and how they experience themselves, and his work started with people that had severe mental health disorders, but then as his work evolved, he started being more interested in typical individuals, people he was seeing in his office, people that would come to him and ask questions, people he would meet in seminars that were interested in the mind, but not necessarily didn't have a mental health issue per se.
They were pretty just interested in understanding themselves and understanding life. And I think in that time, they only had like churches to ask those questions, and to kind of use psychology as a way to understand our deeper selves, because psyche is the soul, and that's what psychology is based on, is the study of the soul.
Yeah, and of course,
but it lost its way in some arenas. But Jung really brought that out.
Yeah, and so his writings are vast, so you can find a lot of different views and perspectives in there. But in general, I think everyone agrees on his theory of the persona. So he saw the persona, the thing we call personality now, as a role that we play, not so much as a fixed set of traits, but more as a malleable, changeable role that we play as ourselves. In essence, we identify as this role, our persona, and then we enacted things that we think will match that.
It's so funny because even thinking about that, it's malleable. So when we have a persona that's at work, we have a persona with our family, maybe our parent, our mother, our parents, our relationship. You have a different persona than your best friend. And then in romantic relationships, you have that persona when you go on a date or when you're in a marriage. How do you present yourself? What do you reveal about yourself? What's more guarded and what's less guarded? And so it's never really consistent, because we have different environments that we interact in. So as a parent to a child, we may have a different persona than as us to our parent, right? It's just like a different idea, but it really is the creating a defense, so to hide how we really feel, to hide our vulnerabilities, to disguise our deepest fears. We protect ourselves with a persona.
Yeah, functionally, so the ego then, the internal ego, meaning our sense of self within our mind, that uses reason and kind of weighs things out, uses the persona to kind of hide behind, and it determines, well, what am I willing to show to the public or to people, to friends and family, and what am I not willing to show? And a lot of that, then Jung says, a lot of the things that we're not willing to show, but also to admit to ourselves, he says we push that into the shadow, into the unconscious mind.
And the shadow is not, a lot of people think it's this dark, terrible thing. These like insecurities or anger, and there is some elements that we push away because we don't want to be angry all the time. So we have that smiley, pleasing face, but we also hide our brilliance. We hide these things that are so wonderful about ourselves. So it's really about your environment and socially what personality fits in and adapts to that environment. Okay. So in an environment that doesn't accept you standing out, that doesn't accept you speaking your mind, that would go into your shadow, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the environment created it as a bad thing. So when we do this kind of work, we're getting rid of that positive, negative. We're getting rid of we're really looking at what's adaptable and non-adaptable in this situation. So, and then we create this persona and we forget that we created these defenses and these patterns, and then we go in our life and want people to like this like surface self and be impressed by it and to be happy with it and say good things about it, not criticize it, praise it. And we kind of make it such an important part of who we are and our happiness that it leads to so much sadness and so much stress and so much suffering because we think we have to keep proving to the world who we are.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think in general, the dissatisfaction comes in, according to Jung, and as we start to get into those midlife years after 30, 35, that we start to feel like, oh my God, is this all there is? Just kind of keeping up this appearance of the persona and shining it up and making it better, right? Gaining new skills, new potential and all that. And people start to feel dissatisfied because he says that's not the aim of our life. You know, we have bigger things to do, but because we're so caught up in the persona and society kind of applauds that kind of building a persona, that we often get trapped in that, you know, and just kind of continuously building up the persona and showing to our friends how great we are, showing to our family how good we are.
And we just keep building it up. We keep thinking, well, I'm going to listen to a recording that's going to tell me you're good enough and you're strong enough. And it's like building up that persona even more. And we think we're improving ourselves, but we're just fluffing up that persona, which is, some people need it. It's a stage, but there's a time where we have to say, well, who am I beyond this mask, beyond my human life and the way I've learned to basically adapt and condition myself to fit in. How do I really truly be my true self? Yeah. And that's what Jung called individuation.
Yeah, so individuation in Jung's model, it means, first of all, integrating the shadow. So, which is for most people kind of a difficult thing, again, because there's usually good reasons why the shadow was pushed away. Yeah. It wasn't adaptive, it wasn't helpful for us in our environment. And so we had to push it away, or it was a survival strategy, essentially. To socially survive, to socially fit in, we had to push away a lot of those things. Now to bring them to awareness and accept them as part of ourselves, he says it's a kind of a moral dilemma that the shadow places us in. Because can we accept these things that we pushed away into the shadow as ourselves.
And it's all the things that you project on other people that you judge for, they're so terrible, there's this. And so imagine saying there's a part of that in me, or there's a part of me that fears being perceived that way. And it's like working through that fear more. It's not like you're an evil person, but maybe the fear of being an evil person or being perceived as an evil person, you're letting the world decide who you are. Like Jung says, the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. And in the beginning of life, the world tells you how to be, what's good and bad. And so now you have to decide, if I, ask my boss for more money, am I evil? If I set a boundary with a person that's not being nice to me, is that being bad or mean? And we start to examine what our motivation is. And so when we say we're integrating it, we're not saying, oh, now I'm accepting that I'm evil, but we're accepting that I'm going to do what I want to do out of my choice. And then if they think I'm evil, it's like, I can't change that. Like you're not triggered by it anymore. You're just really knowing that you're making the decision inside versus making the decision from what other people think. It's such freedom, but it gets such a bad rap because people think, oh, now I have to embrace my dark side. And it's actually not. It's actually saying, I'm not attached to what other people think, basically. I mean, that really is the root of shadow work. Yeah,
and of course, shadow work was not the end of individuation. So a lot of people talk about shadow work as if that was the end of it.
Like it's a technique that you use and then you're done with it. It's just like an isolated technique. It's definitely not. It's like you said, it's that first stage.
Yeah, so individuation, according to Jung, is a much larger process. It begins with shadow work because you have to realize, first of all, that you've been projecting a lot of stuff, and being willing to accept that matures you. It kind of puts you to the test, right? And it's kind of an initiation into a bigger realm of the psyche.
It's like taking responsibility for your life versus blaming others. So if you're blaming others, blaming anything that happened to you in the past as this is why I'm struggling, or this is why this, I feel this way, you're really giving power to the past and other people to define who you are. Yeah. And shadow work, even though it feels uncomfortable to take responsibility, it's not self-blame. It's like, you know what? I can decide now whether I want that past to define me anymore. And that's freedom. That's freedom. Taking that responsibility.
It's the beginning of freedom.
But it is so liberating. I mean, a lot of people, when they go through shadow work, there's like, oh, I feel my mind feels more open. Like you feel more open. It's like Jung says, it's like going through a narrow passage, the shadow. It's like this tight, constricting place that we lived in, and we're reacting to the world. And then when you step out of it, he said, there's no up or no down, no good, no bad. It's like more expansive and weightless and boundless. And that's really where we want to go. So, but it's that tight constriction that it's scary to kind of let go, because I think that a lot of people, I mean, I would love to hear your opinion, but I think a lot of people are comfortable in their patterns. It's just predictable. It's easy. It's kind of comfortable. Like I know where my limitations are, but to say that you're unlimited can feel very daunting for someone to really step into who they're meant to be.
I think they're comfortable for a while though, but it catches up with us, because if we don't do this work, this internal work, we end up in our deathbed trying to figure these things out, trying to come to terms with these things, and that's not the place to do it. You don't have time, you don't have the structure, the energy, and it's not a pretty sight. I've seen many people kind of get to that point, and then it's too late, basically. You want to do it when you're dissatisfied, when you're in the middle of life, when you're struggling,
when you have more time to create something,
and asking these deeper questions of who am I. So if we're not the persona and we're not really the shadow, although we want to integrate the shadow, but still that gives us some mellowing or some kind of coming to terms with our past and our conditioning, but it's not the self yet.
it's more of a softening of compassion for yourself and other human beings.
Absolutely, because we're not projecting. Or
Yeah, we're not like
we're not.
making the world bad anymore. We're going, like I have my own destiny I can create now. Like I can start to see that softening.
Yeah. So the next stage then in individuation is dealing with what Jung called the anima and the animus. And there's a lot of confusion around that because people think in terms of masculine and feminine. And to some extent that's true. He was talking about the masculine image and the feminine image in a man and a woman. But if we look at where his sources and where he was getting those ideas from, it's more to do with these cosmic forces that our individual bodies and minds reflect. If you notice in nature, it operates on this dualistic principle, positive and negative, day and night.
Yin and yang.
Yes. So these forces are definitely within our psyche as well. So he was saying this second stage of individuation beyond the shadow is about harmonizing.
With the universe, the universal.
Integrating, yes, the
beyond
individual
the personal.
And the universal or cosmic, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And it's going to show up as symbols, right? As the mind works, it uses a symbolic language, a symbolic code. So when he's talking about anima, animus, he's talking about these cosmic forces that are playing out in our own psyche.
So the feminine or the anima force of compassion, love, intuition, emotion, physical, the material world, and then the masculine animus is the spirit, the force, the will, the yield, the active force in us. And so we all have masculine and feminine in us, except we take a persona and say, I'm a woman and you're a man, and that's my persona. What we're doing is using both, integrating both, but not on a personal level, like, I need to be more feminine, so I need to dress with frills and, and I need to take a bath and go to the spa, or a guy needs to integrate his feminine by, loving poetry or something. It's much deeper than that. It's more like connecting to a deeper force within us.
Yeah, and I think you hit upon something there that
I did.
When people are applying or trying to apply these ideas, they're doing it from the persona side, right? They still haven't let go of the idea that they're not the persona.
So they haven't done the shadow work, so they're still kind of operating on that they're the identity of the persona.
That's right. And so it hits them as, I have to be more masculine or more feminine, or they're thinking in social terms, not in symbolic psychic
That's
terms.
really good distinction. There's social terms are of the ego, and symbolic terms are of the deeper psyche, the universal mind. So the first stage of individuation is realizing you're the persona, and then entering the shadow, seeing that, then going into tapping into the universal collective unconscious, which Jung says is beyond the personal. So there's two unconsciouses in Jung's theory, which is the personal and collective. And the collective is like the kind of universal, like beyond our human experience, something that is like ageless and timeless in us, that's a part of us. And so the anima is the first step. And then the next stage is really working with the other archetypes and working on an archetypal level with seeing the world in it more, besides like my mom is mean to me or my ex has ruined my life. It's more now like, how do I, as a spiritual being, how do I create and express myself in the world? And then how do I recognize my connection to all these forces and these archetypes through dreams, through visualization, through active imagination, all those things.
Yeah. And here you start to see the scope of his work, right? That it's very much like, because he did study shamans from different parts of the world, it reflects kind of that that element, right? That he's talking about this transformation that's going on as a spiritual process, not just bettering your persona, making a better personality, but really pointing to something deeper in human nature.
He said, like, what connects us? If the people didn't communicate, why do we have these similar patterns? I remember when I was in Denver, probably 20 years ago, it was way before I met you, I went to this seminar with all these indigenous healers from all over the world, Africa, North America, South America, Australia, and they all came together and they were sharing their rituals. Yeah. And they were all saying, wait a minute, we do that same thing. And so how do all these different cultures and different, belief systems, different spiritual traditions, why do they all do the same thing? Why do they all move in the same way? And they maybe a different variation of it, but the same rituals. So there's something beyond our individual mind, this individual thought, this brain in us that is that's transpersonal, that's collective, that's spiritual, and that's really what individuation gives us access to. Otherwise, if we don't go through the process, our persona tries to be spiritual, as we talked about in spiritual bypassing, and we have these kind of intellectual concepts of spirituality, and we understand the rules, and they make a lot of sense, but we're not really having a direct experience. And that's what Jung really brought, is this direct experience of this universal self that is us. It's very magical in a way. It's like more magical than, some of the, tricks that you get to see out there.
Yeah, so let's talk about the self, because that's what we're aiming at here. If we're not the persona, the personality, then who are we? And we can say in this regard that individuation is the way to find out and to realize who you are, the true self in you, as Jung would say, or the self. Eastern philosophy, especially the Upanishads, which we consider basically the manual of what is consciousness and what is the mind, because in the West we're still kind of struggling.
They're still trying to figure it out.
Those definitions.
Yeah.
The Upanishads essentially say there is nothing else you can be except the self. You are already the self. But we've forgotten that, or you've forgotten that by over-identifying with the ego persona.
So it's not something like you have to build up to become enlightened. It's more like letting go of the ignorance that you aren't already enlightened.
Yes.
It's like taking the hands away from your eyes. Vivekananda says, it's you who put your hands over your eyes and cry that it's dark. But you're unlimited. You're the one who's doing that. So we just take our hands away from our eyes. We start to see ourselves in the world and the universe in a different way. Our dream life and all that richness that comes with it.
Yeah, and so the idea that we're not the mind, of course, is a strange idea in the West. We're not used to thinking in those terms. We're used to identifying, with our mind. And then when we think about our awareness or consciousness, we point to the brain, of course, to the head.
Even our personality and our body is this kind of, I'm my history, I'm my credentials, I'm, my thoughts.
But the Upanishads state very clearly, your mind is just like your body, it's part of your body, part of the human experience. It is not your true self. It's not who you really are. It is perhaps part of who you are, right? It's included in your awareness because you're aware of your body and your mind, but it's not the observer who is really there, right? The true self. So it says the observer, the true witness of life, of your body, of your life, is that self, and that self is pure awareness, pure consciousness.
So when you're sitting here listening to our talks, either watching it or listening, there's a part of you that's aware that you're listening right now. Like I'm saying, you're aware. So yes, you could say, I'm aware. So that awareness is who you are, not the actual content of the thoughts.
That's it. That's the mind. The thoughts, emotions, feelings, sensations would be your mind. you're
and we
observing
spend so
that.
much time trying to fix these thoughts, fix these emotions, and I call it rearranging the furniture. You're just rearranging it again and again and making it better. And I feel bad again, so I got to fix that feeling. And we're just kind of chasing like a cat chasing its tail, or a dog. I guess cats don't do that. Dogs do. You're just kind of caught up in it, and it's kind of trying to solve a problem that's not even a problem. It's just like it never gets. It's like almost like a puzzle that you can't solve.
You're looking in the wrong place and you're trying to solve the wrong problem. Yeah, that would be a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's like golf. You can't really win at golf because you hit the first ball and you're already at 1. So you can never have a 0 score in golf if you don't play. So it's like this life is like almost like Arjuna says in the Gita. Is this like a war I can't win? So we're in this life, and if we just focus on the ego, it feels like this war we can't win. This like
I don't know if we have a lot of golf players in our
but everyone knows
audience,
golf.
but
You hit the ball, you get it. Every time you hit the ball, it's a shot. So you can never have 0. You can never not have a perfect game in golf. You can never really win.
We'll have to do a podcast on that.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a very beautiful metaphor for life. Is that we have to play in it, we have to be in it, but we do, what we think is what makes us suffer is like I can never win. I find the relationship and then it's getting dull, or I get this job and it's not as exciting as it used to be. I have these friends, but we're all changing and we have different. It's like we can never freeze time, and everything can be just happy. Vacations. Let's go on a vacation. Let's sit on the beach. Oh, got to go back to work on Monday. It never lasts. So it's like, how do you come to terms with this movable life, this movable person, this, ever-changing persona, and still enjoy the ride in the body?
Yeah, so it's definitely not about pushing it away, not about getting rid of the persona or making it bad, like a lot of people or some people make the ego the enemy, or those kind of things. It's not the enemy. It's simply the way the mind works. We all have egos and we all have personas.
If we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't survive.
Yeah, it helps us survive. It's the way the mind evolved, essentially, in the world. So it's not about pushing and getting rid of your persona or your ego or even your mind. It's about understanding the nature of these things that we call, or that we identify with. We identify with our mind, with our persona, with our ego, and we start to think, that's who I am. So the Upanishads say the practice of self-realization is about letting go of that misperception, finding ways to purify your consciousness, your awareness.
Taking your hands away from your eyes, seeing clearly.
So that you gradually start to realize you've always been the self. There is nothing else you can be. It's the appearance that has kind of hypnotized you into believing you are this small, conditioned mind and individuals.
So,
persona.
question for you is, what's the difference between individuation and self-actualization or self-realization? I mean, a lot of people heard of those terms. What would you say the difference is? Well, let's start with self-actualization, because that's Maslow's the hierarchy of needs. Yeah. It's like the top of the pyramid. What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, so if you look at the hierarchy of needs, Maslow is definitely talking about the persona, right? It's safety needs, self-esteem needs,
love and belonging.
Yes, and then you get to the top, to self-actualization. So I would say self-actualization is it's similar to individuation, but he's talking about the social pyramid, right? How far can you take the persona? So if we ask, how do we evolve the persona and how do we make it better? Yeah, use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It'll show you
how to improve your persona.
How to improve your persona. Nothing wrong with that. We encourage people to make a better persona if they can. But when they're ready to realize the self, to go deeper, to individuate, as Jung would say, then the inner journey is what's important. It's not so much about building up the persona. He does emphasize you need a strong ego to do individuation.
You can't have a ambiguous ego and a persona. You don't really have a strong identity or a strong sense of anything. Like it's the duality, that rigidness that actually helps the process.
Yeah. But it is a letting go, right, of realizing the nature of our persona, that it is kind of a role that we're playing, and that there's something deeper in us to access, to identify with.
So realizing the self, is that the same? Because I know in Eastern philosophy and yoga philosophy, they talk about self-realization. How is that with individuation? It's closer to the mark of individuation than self-actualization.
Oh yeah, much closer. Well, Jung read the Upanishads, he read the Gita, he read some of the Chinese and Eastern Buddhist texts, so Tibetan texts as well. So he was well versed in kind of how they saw it. And he worked, he was closely allied with Zimmer, who was at that time the authority on Eastern text and was the scholar to go to for those kind of questions. So he definitely was aware of kind of the Eastern perspective on the self. I think his aim was to develop, because he always emphasized, look for these things within your own culture, within your own self.
So that's the key, is that if you go to a temple and it's not really fitting with your Western world, it's almost like you're going there and you're learning something like very high concept, and then you can't integrate it into your life. So he found a way to make it more practical and integrative into the Western world.
Absolutely.
Certainly. So individuation is a spiritual process. It's just cloaked in psychology.
Yeah, we can certainly say that Jung, his paradigm, his worldview was that human beings are spiritual beings, whether we like it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. There's something in us that transcends our biology, and that was his aim, to bring out some of the important things that he saw in history, in Eastern and traditional cultures, that was missing in our modern world, right? He wanted to make a psychology that addressed those spiritual needs, those transcendent needs, those magical needs, whatever you want to formulate it as. But, the psyche, he said, is so vast, and it's a mystery to us, really. When we approach it, we're approaching the nature within instead of the nature without, right? The world. So the self then for him was the totality of the psyche. The things we know, the things we're conscious of, aware of, but also the things we're not aware of, the unconscious mind, and the things that we can't even fathom, because nature goes so deep, and it's such it has its
like
own
a history
intelligence.
of all the, from the beginning of time, from the first amoeba on this planet, and then beyond that, billions of years of the universe being, and who knows, I mean, I guess the idea is it's always been, right? And so we have all that history, and just the crashing of and creating of planets and all that within us, that's so amazing.
Yeah, and so the self, the way he formulated it, very close to what the Upanishads are saying, but of course, Jung was very much a man of his time, and he studied with Freud, but was also very much influenced by Schopenhauer and
Hermann Hesse.
I would say the other way around.
Hermann Hesse
was influenced by Jung, but he was around. Nietzsche was a big influence on him. Definitely trying to take some of these ideas that he saw in philosophy and in cultures, and find them in the Western mind, in the context of the modern world.
Because that makes it more accessible to you. It makes more sense, more rational sense than trying to bring in something else and then feel like, oh, that's really a great idea, but I got to make lunch right now, and I don't know, how do I apply that with this person I'm having struggle with? It's like, oh, but I'm the self. And if it's too general, too high concept, you really can't work with it in human life. And the process, I find, the shadow work and the Anima Animus work and the archetypal work, symbolic work, dream work, all helps us see ourselves in these kind of appearances of our experience. That helps us realize it. It's a direct experience versus just a high concept intellectual, ooh, this is a beautiful idea that we're so beautiful and unlimited. It's like, oh, I get it. Like, it's wrestling with our humanity that helps us realize our spirituality.
Yeah, in one of his books, he frames it like this. He says, if you buy into this idea that, okay, the Tibetans, they have the good stuff, and we are bereft of knowledge. He says you're kind of putting your own mind in a very low place, right? You're saying, oh, those people are capable of wisdom and great spiritual practices, but I'm not, or we're not. And he says all you can do in that situation is then kind of mimic or borrow, which is kind of persona, right?
Yeah.
That's what the persona
spiritual
is.
Bypass, or spiritual persona. Yeah.
Yeah, he says, no, find it within yourself, even if it's imperfect, even if it's not those high ideals that we're talking about. That kind of humble finding it within your own experience is much more powerful than presenting these high ideas that are foreign, that are not you. So he always emphasizes that kind of individuation is finding those elements within your mind, within your history, within your experience.
I remember years ago doing yoga, like years and years ago, and hearing the word namaste, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. The divine in me is the divine in you. But it was a nice concept, but I just didn't really get it. Like I was, yes, namaste at my yoga class. But this actually, you got to take it a step further. How does that really impact my life? How am I living? Am I having relationships where I am seeing the divine in that person, or am I getting triggered? And am I walking the talk, as they say? So it's about like integrating these high concepts into the everyday life is what I think Jung really helps us do. And the shadow work is kind of like the initiation. It's the entry point into the big world of our really true nature. So to sum up, this has been a great series.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about the personality and the persona. There's a lot to it.
Yeah. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll continue on for our next series. But if you haven't listened to all of them, please go back. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. And we'd love an honest review if you have one. Love to have a comment below. If you enjoyed what you heard today, have a question about what you heard today, we'll answer your questions. So please feel free to drop in a comment below. And I think I'll just leave it with, let's remember our pure awareness. Remember who you are, and start just kind of paying attention to that witness. It's like a kind of a light passenger that's kind of hanging out with you, and it's really that part of who you are.
Yeah. See you next time.
All right.
Thanks for watching.
Take care. Have a great day.